Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Storyteller's Corner. I'm your host, Joshua T. Calkins Trilogy, also known as Byron Residius. Today we're going to be continuing the presentation of Captured, a Metroid fanfiction written and presented by yours truly. We pick up today where we last left off with Part 6. Hammer inspected the exterior of the suit with one of his less sophisticated instruments, hoping that this one wouldn't set off whatever defense mechanism had kept it shut against him since they had first pried the bounty hunter out of it. The moment they'd gotten Samus Aran out of the armor, it had clapped shut like a steel drum, and nothing he had used to inspect it seemed capable of doing anything more than getting zapped and, as a result, dying out itself. There was an obvious thumbprint access nub on the right side of the chest plate segment, but even using a tactile reconfiguration replicator, he'd been unable to open the suit. When he had pressed the faux hand against the nub, a jolt of electricity had fried it to a blackened stump. "What am I missing here, Wrench?" he asked the mechanic, who had only recently returned to the maintenance lab, looking flushed but happier than usual. "I get that this thing's been modified, but what in the shit good is it to be able to crack this thing open once if we can't do it again?" "How'd you get it open in the first place?" she asked, looking down into a tall, square trash receptacle, currently hosting about a quarter of the weapons specialist's analysis tools in the dimly lit repair shop area. "We were down in the med lab, and the second the doc turned on his scanners, the suit just popped open. Rivet and I hauled her out of it, and then it snapped shut on us. She was wearing some kind of fit suit underneath, too. It's over there," he said, vaguely pointing behind himself at a crumpled blue fit suit draped over another tool bench. Wrench picked it up and looked it over carefully, making note of the tiny contact diodes placed on the inside of the suit's material. "This is more than a fit suit, Hammer," she observed, pulling his attention away from his old-fashioned system scanner. The Cathus's tail twitched rapidly back and forth as he pushed his wheeled stool, rolling backwards until he nearly collided with Wrench, spinning to join her at the tool bench. She rolled the material until two of the diodes shone in the light hanging down over the bench, a silvery little button. "See this? It's a contact diode." "Think this suit was feeding data to the armor?" he asked. "Makes sense," said Wrench. "Kind of a fancy setup for a woman in her line of work." "Useful, though," said Hammer. "A lot of hunters and mercs, they use systems like this to dose themselves with painkillers and battle stims. Instead, she's using it to feed herself information, help herself adjust her battle plan accordingly. She's skilled, strong, and from everything I've heard about the woman, weirdly smart. She's not going to go in half-cocked on a fight without knowing exactly what her limits are." "Still," Hammer said, fetching a cigarette out of the pack that he kept in his vest pocket, "it doesn't tell us much about how to get into the suit." Wrench set the blue material down and turned toward the heavy metal door, laid out on Hammer's mobile work table. "They're connected somehow," she mused aloud. "Yeah, well, when you think of how, you let me know," said the Cathus, pulling out a laser cutter from one of his tool cabinets. "Meanwhile, I'm going to try good old-fashioned brute force." The first meal arrived an hour after the Masao and his men marched away, the thin plastic tray materializing first, followed by a bowl of some kind of stew, a spoon, and a plastic cup filled with what Samus thought smelled a little like apple juice. She took the tray in her hands, walked it over to her bunk, sat down, and sniffed the food and drink. The stew smelled like most foodstuffs that had been put through short-range teleportation, which was to say slightly less appealing than microwave styrofoam, but marginally better than dog shit. The odor was short-lived, soon replaced with the subdued scent of the food itself. In over 200 galactic years, nobody had quite yet figured out how to eliminate this temporary issue, largely because it affected neither taste nor nutritional value. So long as that was fine, nobody seemed to mind a momentary olfactory issue. Samus quickly ate her food and drank the juice, setting the bowl and cup back on the tray. Whoever worked in the mess would likely notice if a metal spoon was not returned, so she put this back on as well before setting the tray back in the teleport divot. The tray quickly evaporated, taking everything else with it. Samus returned to the bunk, looking over at the toilet and sink. It was a common configuration, a panel set just beside them that would cause the toilet to sink into the floor and the sink section of the wall to pivot around, revealing a narrow shower stall to maximize the use of holding space. A thin privacy curtain would jut out from the wall, affording her some small bit of dignity should she choose to bathe. She fully intended to do so, though not until she had seen to something else. Samus pulled open the mirror above the sink and located a thin tube of toothpaste and a thin plastic toothbrush, standard issue items for a holding cell. Unlike prison's planet side, most ship-bound holding cells were not expected to be used long-term for hardened criminals or convicts, so the kind of security precautions one might find there would not be expected here. This, much to Samus's delight. She unzipped her speed suit down to her bust line, tucked the brush into her cleavage, and closed the mirror. She then pressed the flip panel and waited until the privacy drape extended, pulling the thin white sheet aside to hide herself from the camera located just outside of her cell, as well as the guards, should they opt to come take a looky-loo. She unzipped the fit suit, dropped the brush by the drain, and tossed the suit just out of the showerhead's range, so it would remain dry. As soon as the water began pouring out, a semi-arctic blast that would drive most prisoners to shower hastily, she sat down on the faux ceramic flooring of the shower stall and began working on the handle of the brush, rubbing it back and forth roughly over the narrow metal holes in the drain. One step at a time, she thought, as she shaped her weapon. Matthews was a competent enough navigator, especially with the ship's destination coordinates already set, so Driver didn't feel badly for calling the other pilot down to the bridge a little early to take over for him. The amphibian humanoid had been staring into the big empty for long enough, he figured, so a little downtime for some grub and relaxation was called for. Heading down to the mess on Deck 3, Driver nodded to the only pair of humans he passed on his way into the large, circular chamber that served as the galley aboard the dozer. He snagged a tray from the end of the buffet-style line that had been set up during the vessel's construction, standing on tiptoe to try and spot whoever was working the mess at this hour. He spied the flicking orange-furred tail of Picker, one of the other catholic members of the crew, flashing past the service window beyond the serving trays. "Picker, a little help for a little guy?" the frog-like creature called out. A minute later, the wiry Catman appeared through the doorway to the left of the tray line in his filthy apron and poofed pastry hat cocked jauntily to one side, held in place by one of his radar dish-like ears. "Hey, Driver," Picker said. "Heard some of the guys saying we picked ourselves up some dangerous cargo, eh?" "You heard about that, huh?" asked Driver with a nod. "Yeah, Samus ran. Kind of weird finding her like we did." "Not that weird if you think about it," said Picker. "You want the usual, my man?" "Yeah, and don't shortchange me on potatoes." "What do you mean, not that weird?" "Well, this section of space got a reputation for hosting folks like us, you know. People what got a price on their heads. And what does Iran do, Driver?" "Hunts people with prices on their heads. Yeah, I get it," Driver grumped. "Apparently she got ambushed. Some other hunter set up a trap for her." "Huh. No shit? I guess there's no love lost in that profession. You want the pork rib sandwich with the sweet sauce or hot?" "Do you even have to ask?" The Catholics put a short hoagie on a thin plastic plate and added it to the tray, the sweet, smoky sauce resplendent to Driver's nostrils. "What I don't get is the sensor sweep results." "What do you mean?" "There were signs of damage to Rand's ship, plain as day, but no traces of weapon signatures," the frog-like pilot said. "There's only a handful of weapon types that don't leave any kind of latent energy in their targets, and most of those are illegal as hell. Doesn't seem like the kind of thing that a rival bounty hunter would be allowed to have rigged up to their ship." "Sure, but they come in all kinds, don't they?" asked Picker. "I mean, we're outlaws ourselves, but we don't really go in for the raunchy shit, you know? Slaving and stuff like that, I mean. So, no matter the profession, people take things differently. Different approach for different folks." "I suppose you've got a point," said Driver. "Still, it bugs me." Thus concludes Part 6 of Captured, a Metroid fanfiction. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for tuning in once again. Thank you for listening. I ask, as always, that you take care of yourselves, and remember, keep reading.